Welcome, friends. We're glad that you've chosen today to join us in our studies of different prophecies from the book of Isaiah, dealing primarily with prophecies of Jesus Christ and of his kingdom. We trust all is well with you, that you're in good health, and that you are indeed prospering in the grace of God. As we studied in past two studies, we studied the prophecy that was made in Isaiah, the 7th chapter, a prophecy that concerns the measure of the virgin birth of Jesus Christ. The things that surround this and the context that surround the giving of this prophecy has to do in the time when Ahaz was the king of Judah. Isaiah was one that served during the time that he lived, and then on into the time of his son Hezekiah, who lived after him. Ahab was the king of Judah. He was of the seed of David, but he did not follow in the path of his ancestor David. He was a very wicked man. He was a man that was very cruel. He was an idolater. He closed the temple of God at one point in his life, and not only did he do that, the record says he made his sons to pass through the fire. He was wholly given to idolatry. Ahaz was one that had a great fear because two countries to the immediate north of him, the 10 tribes that had broken away from them, of the 12 tribes, the 10 tribes called Israel, and another kingdom that they were familiar with, Damascus or Syria. These two countries, Syria and Israel, had formed a confederacy, and they were going to go against Judah, and they intended to remove Ahaz from being a king, and very likely to assassinate him, and instead to place someone else to sit upon the throne. And the people in Judah were terribly afraid of this, and they purposed that they were going to have to get some help. And since they didn't believe in God, it was going to have to be from the help of some mighty power. And so they were determined that they were going to appeal unto Assyria. Well, God sent a message to Isaiah that he was to carry to the king Ahaz. And he saw Ahaz, and he said that the Lord is a message for you. You're not to fear these two countries, Syria and Israel, because they're going to come to naught. And don't involve yourself with the country of Assyria. It will be to your hurt and to your injury. But of course, Hezekiah, or rather Ahaz, paid no attention to that because he didn't really believe in Jehovah. And the Lord said, for your confidence, for you to believe, Ahaz, this is the way it's going to be. These two nations are going to come to naught. And to prove that, I'll give you a sign in heaven or on the earth beneath. But Ahaz refused the sign of God. He wouldn't accept it. He said, no, I don't want to tempt God. But God was one that was angry because he refused a sign of the truthfulness of what he had promised him. He said, all right, I'll give to the nation of Israel or the nation of Judah a sign. And that sign is that we've studied for 2 weeks. The book of Isaiah 7 and 14 unto us, he speaks of the virgin shall conceive and shall bear a son and shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. And we studied concerning this virgin, how that it was prophesied that such would be. And then we talked about the matter that for this virgin son that was to be born, that God prepared a body for him because it was necessary for him to have a body like man, that he might suffer in man's stead and become the sacrifice for the sins of the world. But Ahaz refused that, and he sought, as it were, help from Assyria. Well, he got some help in the fact that momentarily he was relieved from the pressure of Israel and of Syria, but he received no real help. Assyria never intended that they would be ones that would come to the help of this country and make a confederate of them. They intended to kill, to enslave the people of Syria and of Israel, and then go right on down south and put Judah in the same circumstances. They were no help at all. And they began their fall again, and they entered into this war of doing what God had told Ahaz was going to take place, that the nation of Israel were going to fail, and that the nation of Syria would come to naught. And they entered into the northern provinces of Israel, and these were the regions called Zebulun and Naphtali. And they subdued them, and they were then taken away, enslaved, and they never were ones that existed as a nation again. It is upon the basis of that another prophecy was given, and we're looking in the book of Isaiah, the 9th chapter, and the first few verses in the 9th chapter. And the record speaks and says that in the former times he thought or brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter times hath he made it glorious by the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light, and they that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them light hath shined forth. And so here is these two nations, or these two tribes that compose a part of the nation of Israel. They were ones that had been defeated, taken away into captivity. Darkness had descended upon them, but the prophet declared the time is coming when light is going to be that is going to shed forth the illumination and hope to them. This prophecy found here, these words found here, are those that are repeated by the gospel writer Matthew as he speaks about the personal ministry of Jesus Christ. When Jesus began his personal ministry, for a while, the ministry of John the Baptist and of Jesus overlapped. And Jesus was for a period of time in Judea. John was in Galilee. He was near the river in Judah. He was near the river of Jordan because there was much water there, and Jesus was near to that possession or spot as well. But you'll remember how that Herod was one that seized John the Baptist because John had angered his wife and him by telling him that the woman that he took, who was first the wife of his brother, that he had no right to his brother's wife. And so he enslaved John the Baptist. And when Jesus heard that John was imprisoned and delivered up, he removed himself from close to that region and moved himself into the land of Galilee, the northernmost parts of that nation. And the record declares in Matthew 4 that was his activity. And he went to the city of Capernaum, and there he spake of it as his own city. But interestingly enough, Capernaum is that same region in which Naphtali and Zebulun was, that had one time once sat in darkness, but to them light had shone forth. And the Bible said that as he quotes this prophecy from Isaiah, that Jesus said today, as he spake in a certain synagogue in that city, he said today, this prophecy has been fulfilled in your ears. The light that was shined forth was to a region originally in darkness. And that light that shone forth was the teaching of Jesus Christ and the fact that Jesus was the fulfillment of the further prophecy that Isaiah had given in the 9th chapter. Wonderful are these words. Thrilling are they. Here is what Isaiah said in the 9th chapter and verse 6. Unto us a child is born. Unto us a son is given. And the government shall be upon his shoulders. His name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end. Upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom to establish it. And the record says, the zeal of the Lord shall accomplish this. And here's the prophecy. Unto us a child is born. And the child that was born to us a son is given. Was that son that the virgin had born. And as we look, we find that this son that was born was the child that was given to the nation of Israel, to Judah. And he was the the son that was given. And notice the record teaches that the government's up on his shoulders. This child, this son, was going to be one that would be the head of government, in essence, a king. And it would be something that was prophesied of this virgin son in this passage as well as in other passages. He was to be a king. And the name of this son is adjectives that describe his nature. And notice that his name shall be called Wonderful. Wonderful was Jesus Christ. We wonder, we marvel at the power that was manifest by him. Power, as he had power over sin, over Satan. And not only was his name Wonderful, but he was a counselor. He gave advice that was everlasting and beneficial in its nature. In the book of Colossians, the 2nd chapter and verse 3, the Bible teaches us that in him are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and of knowledge. He is one that is able to give the proper kind of counsel and wisdom. And then as we look in the Old Testament once more, we find that the prophet Zechariah has something to say about the counseling that this one, that was the son of the virgin, should do. And in Zechariah, we find that the Bible talks about what this son was going to be and what this son was going to do. Zechariah talks about the fact that, behold, the man that's called the branch. He that is called the branch is one that shall grow up out of his place, and he shall build the temple of Jehovah. Even he shall build the temple of Jehovah. He shall bear the glory. He shall sit and rule upon his throne. He shall be a priest upon his throne, and the counsel of peace shall be between them both. Here we find that the Bible talks about the man called the branch. Who could that be but Jesus Christ, who is called the branch of David? And this branch, the man whose name is called the branch, was going to grow up out of his place. He was going to be one that would sit upon his throne. He would rule upon his throne. He'd be a priest upon his throne. He would be a king. He'd be a priest. And the counsel of peace would exist between him being the king, a lawgiver, and one that was a priest, one that offered sacrifices for the sins of mankind. So he was to be a counselor. His name not only was Wonderful and Counselor, he was called the Mighty God, because that's who he is. He is God. Remember, John 1, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that had been made. He is the mighty God. And we look and we find that the Apostle Peter affirmed as much. He said, "Ye men of Israel, hear these words, Jesus of Nazareth, a man approved of God unto you, but mighty works and wonders and signs which God did in him in the midst of you, even as you yourselves know." God approved his Son, which he sent into this world, sanctified, and sent to accomplish a mission of redemption for lost mankind. And this one, he was one that approved of him mighty works and wonders and signs. You look at Jesus in his personal ministry, and you find him having power over nature. He stilled the tempest that raged on the Sea of Galilee. And he not only was one that had the power over nature, he had power over the matter of nature in the sense that he could, from 5 loaves and 2 fishes, feed a multitude of people and gather up a dozen baskets of those things that were scraps. And not only did he have the power over nature in that sense, he had the power over disease and sickness. He was one that healed the matter of lepers. He would give and cast demons, unclean spirits, out of those that were possessed by them. He had the power to give sight to those that were blind. He had power to raise individuals from the dead. He was one that was a mighty God. He was not only called a mighty God, he was called one that was everlasting Father. He is Creator. He is the one that in him is life, and all individuals and living beings owe their existence and their creation to him. And then he not only is identified as everlasting Father, he's called the Prince of Peace. And this was the message that Jesus spake to his people. You will notice that this one that the Lord speaks of as the Prince of Peace, that one, he said not only that the government was going to be on his shoulders, but he said that of the increase of his government and peace there should be no end. And this was what God had prophesied through Daniel, in which Daniel saw this kingdom that Jesus was going to build. And in Daniel, the 2nd chapter, in verse 44, having interpreted a dream that Nebuchadnezzar had dreamed. He speaks of a stone that was cut out without hands that smote an image that Nebuchadnezzar had dreamed of that consisted of 4 parts, and that stone devoured and destroyed that image, and then it began to grow and became a great nation that filled all the earth. And as we look, we find that the Scripture declares that in regard to that Daniel said, in the days of these kings, the 4th kingdom, God's going to set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the sovereignty thereof be left to other peoples. It will break in pieces all these kingdoms, and it will last forever. And that's what Isaiah said, of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end. It's going to last and last and last until Jesus comes again. And then he said, upon the throne of David. He was no impostor. He had a right to the throne of David because he was David's son. And he was David's immaculate son, one that was his son, but also was his Lord. Remember the question that Jesus asked the Jews, what do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he? And they said, he's the son of David. That was right. And he said, well, then how doth David in the Spirit say, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make thine enemies the footstool of thy feet. If he is his son, how is he his Lord? And they didn't know how to answer that because they had no place in their hearts for recognizing that physically that Jesus was the son of David, but that he was God, and he was in essence responsible for the very existence of David himself. And so he speaks of the fact that he sat upon David's throne and his throne, and he declared it was that would exist and continue forever. Wonderful are these things that were spoken to the nations that had threatened Ahaz. But God said, I'm going to bring to naught. And Assyria did begin and subdued them and took them into captivity. And darkness was that fell on this land. But then there was light that shone forth, and that light was the light that was given by the work of the virgin son. In our next session, we're going to be looking at another prophecy of this virgin son. It's found just a couple of chapters over from what we've studied today, the 11th chapter. And we encourage you to plan to study with us next week and look at this chapter, read it, and meditate upon it. May God bless you. May you be filled with good things, and may your heart's desire be to please God and to serve him.